Hello, and welcome to the Diane Rehm Book Club. I am Lynn Kronberger, the Chief Development Officer here at WAMU. As a public media organization, our mission is to connect listeners and members to each other and around the world. And we have been creating more of these events for those of us who are still stuck at home or people who still want to find a way to connect to the community around them, like this Diane Rehm Book Club. We see these events from these topical conversations about the new cultural conversations like this book club as a way to connect people. So I'm sure you know the backbone of support for public media and WMU comes from you, the public. Support from listeners and members is our most reliable and important source of funding. Public radio works because listeners like you who value the service step up and give back. So if you have been enjoying these monthly book clubs, we would ask you to consider making a gift of support. You can go to dianerehm.org/give. It's dianerehm.org/give. So we are grateful to the 747 people who have registered today to join us. Just so you know, this event is being recorded and streamed on Facebook, and there is closed captioning available. Just click at the bottom. And now let's start the discussion with our wonderful host, Diane Rehm.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today for our monthly book club. Today, The Lying Life of Adults. It's quite a title, by Italian author Elena Ferrante. It's a coming-of-age story set in Naples that explores class, sexuality, family, and friendship. Joining me today, Laura Benedetti. She's professor of contemporary Italian culture at Georgetown University. Welcome, Laura. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you, Diane.
Alexander Chee is the author of the novels Edinburgh and The Queen of the Night, and the essay collection How to Write an Autobiographical Novel. Thank you for joining us, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
And Lili Loofbourow. She's a staff writer at Slate and joins us from Oakland, California. Good to have you with us, Lili.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, we will be taking your questions throughout this hour. If you have one, you can go to the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen and, pardon me, put your question in there. We'll try to get to just as many as we can. I want to start this conversation by listening to the opening passage. And actually, we are fortunate enough to have from her recording of the book, Marissa Tomei, reading from the audio book, The Lying Life of Adults. Let's listen.
2 years before leaving home, my father said to my mother that I was very ugly. The sentence was uttered under his breath, in the apartment that my parents, newly married, had bought at the top of Via San Giacomo di Capri in Rione Alto. Everything, the spaces of Naples, the blue light of a frigid February, those words, remained fixed. But I slipped away, and am still slipping away, within these lines that are intended to give me a story, while in fact I am nothing, nothing of my own, nothing that has really begun or really been brought to completion. Only a tangled knot, and nobody, not even the one who at this moment is writing, knows if it contains the right thread for a story or is merely a snarled confusion of suffering without redemption.
Laura, I must say, what a terrible phrase to hear from your father. Tell us what we learn about our narrator and from our narrator with this passage.
Yes, well, I must say a similar topic has fascinated Elena Ferrante for a long time. In her collection of essays, Frantumaglia, she talks about a similar passage in Madame Bovary. She talks of the moment when Emma Bovary, talking about her daughter, Berthe, says, "Isn't it strange how ugly this child is?" And so in this essay, Elena Ferrante insists on the devastating power of that sentence. So clearly here she starts the novel with that sentence, and in a way it is that sentence that starts the action and starts the adventures of the protagonist. But we also, if I may, we also learn something else, because it seems to me that there is so much emphasis on the location in that first passage. So perhaps I could show you this map that I have as my virtual background, because I'm not in Naples. And you can see Via San Giacomo dei Capri, it's the red arrow in this map. And as you heard in the passage, it's the Rione Alto, so the high district. High because it's on a hill, on the Vomero. But in the context of the novel, it also, that denomination, alto, high, also carries a social implication, right? And in fact, when the protagonist then decides to venture into the other Naples, and this is the path that I've traced on Google Maps here, she goes to visit her aunt near the Zona Industriale, so the industrial district. And that's the green arrow on my map. But the blue arrow, there actually, I think it's probably purple, a purple arrow, is the Rione Luzzatti. And the Rione Luzzatti is where Elena and Lila grew up in the Neapolitan Quartet. So basically, we start from a different social class and from the Rione Alto, the high district, but pretty soon we find ourselves back in the world of the Neapolitan Quartet. And I thought that was interesting, given the emphasis in this opening passage on the address, San Giacomo dei Capri.
Thank you, Laura. That's very, very helpful. And Lili, when Giovanna hears her father say she's getting the face of Vittoria, what does that mean to her and to her father, and where does it take her?
Well, you know, I think one of the most interesting things about that opening passage that we just heard is it introduces us to the problem of narration and distortion right away, right? Because she starts off by saying, "My father called me ugly." And we learn very quickly that that's not in fact what he said at all, right? This is about the anxiety of interpretation and of how one is trying to like look through a lens that inevitably distorts, right? What kinship means and what resemblance means, and whether resembling this very objectionable character, Vittoria, her father's sister, her need to know what that resemblance means to him is basically the engine of the whole novel. And so she starts looking for any image of her that she can find, and discovers that in this metal box that is sort of separate from the family albums that she's encouraged to look at, that there are some photographs of her parents when they were young, and in particular of her father, with two figures, in fact, I think, both of whom have been blacked out with Sharpie, essentially with a pen. And she realizes that this must be the person who she resembles, and her need to know what that means visually as well as symbolically becomes an obsession, I think.
Alex, I must say, Giovanna's father plays a very strong role in this novel. Tell us about him.
You know, he's what's interesting to me about him as a character in the novel is he's this kind of he's a lot like the fathers in the other Ferrante novels to me, like the kind of stern, disapproving, secretive men who are living in another story from the characters in the novel that we only get to glimpse a little bit, you know. Excuse me. That was something that struck me periodically, was that, you know, a lot of the novel is her trying to figure out what he means by that, and whether what he means is something that is something truly damning about her. It has the qualities. The novel takes on the qualities of a fairy tale, and the father's character is the kind of the sorcerer who delivers a curse, not at the cradle, but at the start of her adolescence, you know.
When every young woman feels so insecure to begin with, to hear what you think your father is saying, saying that you're ugly, can really be just totally devastating and throw you off for a very long time, it seems to me. I mean, what do you make of that, Laura?
Well, it's fascinating that Alex mentioned the fairy tale component of the novel, and this idea of the curse. At some point, the protagonist Giovanna meets a person who seems to be the only positive male character in the story, Roberto, and Roberto tells her that she's very beautiful. Yes. So that seems to be the counter curse. Yes. So except that then it's not that pattern, luckily I would say, is not very well respected. In other words, it's not that simple. It's not the curse and the counter curse, because we discovered that Roberto cannot be, or at least at this point of the story, cannot be the salvation that Giovanna was hoping for. but it's an interesting, there was definitely that temptation of going all the way, following the fairy tale model all the way with the counter, with the curse and the kiss of the prince, if you wish. But luckily that does not happen.
But clearly Giovanna's curiosity is aroused. She wants to know about Vittoria. She wants to know who she is, what she is, why her father considers his sister ugly and compares her, Giovanna, to Vittoria. How do you see that, Lili?
I am really fascinated about how this novel is obsessed with the anxiety of resemblance throughout, and we get these multiple sort of triangles where she guesses at one relation between people. For example, she thinks that her mother is having an affair with Mariano, when in fact it is not that at all, right? In fact, her father is having an affair with Costanza, which upends her life completely, but her fatal misreading of that scene that she saw.
And we should say here that Costanza is Mariano's wife. So, in fact, it's not the mother who's having the affair, it's the father who's having the affair. It is such a complicated situation, but go on with Vittoria.
Well, yeah, it's extremely complicated, and I think the sort of disillusion of her ability to map out relations between people is neatly expressed by the fact that by the end, her mother, who has sworn to her that she is not having an affair with Mariano at this point, is, after she has separated from her father, in fact sleeping with Mariano. So everything that she believes she knows gets first inverted, and then it somehow reverts back. And so the problem of knowledge, of certainty, I think becomes something of an obsession for her. And I think, that final encounter with Roberto, by that point, we have so many different positions that she could be occupying in that love triangle, right? Roberto is dating her friend Juliana. And is she going to be her father, who is breaking up a marriage between his best friend and his wife? Is she going to fulfill that function? Is she being Vittoria if she goes through with this, right? Sleeping with Enzo and with Margarita and betraying Margarita, her friend. There are so many potential ways in which she could be accidentally reproducing these complicated circles of betrayal that I think that initial problem of her resembling Vittoria sort of becomes a problem of what if she resembles anyone.
Alex?
It's making me think about the way my own family operates and the way, so I have been told I look like both my father and my father's oldest brother. And those are very different choices. Those are very different men. And I was missing my uncle recently, and I undertook a kind of imitation of his style where I wore a chambray shirt like he always used to wear, with a navy blazer like he always used to wear, and did an event. And it was, the sort of the relief of being like him in that moment, because he had been a professor also, and although he was a legal scholar, was something that I was thinking about as I was looking over this book again and thinking about what Lili's talking about, this anxiety of resemblance and the way in which when you're young, you're trying to figure out like, what does this life have for me? And who will I become in these ways that you might even resemble the relatives who your family doesn't feel so great about.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way that they'll tell you about it.
And so, Alex, why do you think Giovanna doesn't simply ask her father what he means by saying she is getting ugly like Vittoria?
Oh, I mean, who would want more details? Sorry, but like, I mean, if my father had said something like that to me or my mother, like, I would have been like, okay, that's enough. I don't want to hear anything else
You
about
don't
it.
want to hear it.
Yeah. As curious as I would be, and I would be curious, I would not want to hear anything else about it.
Laura, how about you?
Well, I found the passage where finally Giovanna meets Vittoria, and she says, Vittoria seemed to me to have a beauty so unbearable that to consider her ugly became a necessity. So here it's clear that this ugliness, Victoria's ugliness, is not an aesthetic judgment, but it's ugliness as transgression, ugliness as disorder. I'm thinking of a colleague of mine who wrote a book titled precisely Patrizia Bettella. The name of my colleague is Patrizia Bettella, and the title of the book is precisely The Ugly Woman. Transgressive aesthetics in Italian literature, and I don't remember the whole title, but that's precisely the idea, since Italian literature is so marked by the idea of the beautiful woman who elevates the man who loves her. What does ugliness represent? It represents an unwillingness, a refusal to cooperate. As I said, it represents, transgression, disorder, something that is pushed at the margins. And I think that's perhaps that's why Giovanna doesn't ask anything more. She realizes pretty early on that there is something more at stake there than an aesthetic judgment.
And what do you think that is, Lili?
Well, I mean, I think the extraordinary concern for her is that she's overhearing that, right? Her father is not actually saying it to her. So it contains the danger of radical honesty in a way that had her father said it to her directly, she would have been protected. But she knows that he wants, to protect her and to help her psychologically develop. So the fact that it is overheard and that eavesdropping is sort of the source of that anxiety, I think makes it especially urgent to figure out what her...
We should say that Giovanna's father says it to Giovanna's mother. And what does her mother say in response to that? Does she defend Giovanna? Does she say that's an outrageous statement? What does she do, Lili?
It seems like it's kind of a weak rebuttal, right? She kind of hand waves it away, says, "Oh, not really," But there is no outrage. She doesn't take umbrage and say, "How could you say that?" And so because Giovanna knows that her parents' disapproval of Vittoria is extreme to the point that she's not spoken of, to hear her invoked in relation to Giovanna, and then to have her mother not vigorously reject that, but actually maybe just weakly kind of not want to discuss it, I think actually adds urgency and panic to her need to figure out what Vittoria is. And it's such a lovely detail, right, that when she actually does find the scratched out photos, she tries with a scalpel to cut away the pen markings, and she just finds whiteness underneath. Right. So like there is nothing underneath the image that has been, scribbled.
So Alex, what do you make of Vittoria? Is she just an habitual liar? Is she one of those people who tells Giovanna half-truths and then comes back and corrects them and then tells another? Who is she? What is she?
Well, I mean, she's a trickster character, I think. And, there's this very funny passage, if I can read from it, on page 85, where she's actually kind of pushing on her niece's anxiety about resembling her. Vittoria, as if she had perceived that sense of estrangement, at times seemed to want to help me get over it. At others, accentuated it purposely. "Madonna," she'd exclaim, "look, we have the same hands." And she'd put hers next to mine, and her thumb would bump up against my thumb. That bump filled me with emotion. I would have liked to hug her tight or stretch out next to her with my head on her shoulder, hear her breath, her rough voice. But more often, as soon as I said something that seemed wrong to her, she chided me, saying, like father, like daughter, or she made fun of the way my mother dressed me. You're grown up. Feel those tits you have. You can't go out dressed like a little doll. You should rebel, Gianni. They're ruining you. Then she started up her refrain. Look at them, your parents. Look at them carefully. Don't let them fool you. It's a sort of, there's a proxy conflict, right, between the father and Vittoria, and she's fighting back through her niece, but also I think also with her niece in mind, at least in her mind, she thinks this proxy battle is her way of helping her niece in this way that the parents are spoiling her.
Helping her do what?
Helping her be herself, which is possibly more like her. More like the aunt that she allegedly resembles, which is I think part of what is so funny about it,
Laura, do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think here is where the social element plays a big role, right? Because Giovanna's father had escaped the neighborhood where he was born, right? A bit like Elena Greco, again, in the Neapolitan novels, escapes the same neighborhood, right? And yet, with that comment at the beginning of the novel, he sets her daughter up to pursue a quest back to that world that he has escaped. So in search of authenticity, in a way, right? I mean, and that's what Victoria claims at the beginning of the novel. I'm the real thing, your father thinks that he is better than us, that he has escaped, but look at him. He doesn't make you hot chocolate. He doesn't give you this. He doesn't give you that. He has cut you out from the world to which you belong. That's Victoria's message at the beginning of the novel, right?
It's interesting to think about this sibling relationship between Giovanna's father and Vittoria, because it is so bitter. It goes to the very heart of Vittoria's relationship with the man she loved, a married man, Costanza's husband. And what Giovanna's father did in the process. You might just talk about that, Lili.
Yeah, and the part where I found myself relating to this novel, finding it somewhat therapeutic, I think, is that I too have a large family and have grown up hearing many different versions of the same story, whose core is really hard to get to, depending on who you talk to. The betrayals are quite different, the motivations are quite different, but there is always a thing at the center, whether it's a house or a bracelet or whatever it is. In this case, it's an apartment, right? It's the family apartment where the siblings grew up, that is an object of contention once the mother dies, and there are 5 siblings and 4 of them want to let Vittoria live in it. But her brother, Andrea, this is Giovanna's father, does not. He wants to sell it and split it the 5 ways. And so she finally asks Enzo, her lover, Margherita's husband. Vittoria asks Enzo to interfere on her behalf, and he, a policeman, does and offers to buy out Andrea's share. And Andrea will later tell Giovanna that he interpreted this as Enzo wanting to take possession of the house. What Vittoria tells Giovanna is that he couldn't let go of the principal, and money matters to him most, to her brother most. And so he went and told Margarita that she and Enzo had been having an affair behind her back, and destroyed the entire relation. And Enzo died a few years later, months later, I believe. So yeah, I found myself like actually like putting Post-its every time somebody told a version of that story to see if I could ever get to like an actual true
Yeah,
relation.
exactly. You don't know who is telling the truth about this story, Alex, whether it's Vittoria or whether it's Andrea or whether it's Giovanna's mother. You really, really do not know. We have a question. Someone says, I'm interested in how the protagonist slips from Italian into what appears several levels of Italian dialect. Is this common, Laura?
It would be extremely, extremely common. But here Elena Ferrante uses the same strategy that she used in the Neapolitan portrait. You may remember that in the Neapolitan portrait, every few pages, we had an indication whether a person had expressed themselves in Italian or in dialect, right? But actually dialect was never present in the novel, right? There were perhaps in the whole series, the whole 4 novels, perhaps there are 4 or 5 words in dialect. And here she does the same. So although she says, oh, you know, Giovanna at some point, for instance, says that she tries to modify hyper-correct Italian to match Vittoria's language, and we have other annotations like that, but the actual dialect never appears in the novel. So
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, yes, and that's the same thing that she did in the Neapolitan portrait. And in fact, if you watch the HBO series, the first thing that is striking is that they're all speaking in dialect when you watch, because there was no way around this. It would have been, it would have felt very contrived, very fake if everybody had been speaking Italian. So in the series, they speak the dialect, and sometimes, you know, even when I watch the original series, sometimes I have to help myself with the Italian subtitles, for instance, you know. So definitely this dichotomy is very present in this other novel as well, perhaps not as much as it was in the Neapolitan portrait, where it's really central. You know, we have all the process, because in the Neapolitan portrait, we have all the process of Elena trying to learn Italian in a way, and her struggle and all of that. While here, the protagonist, Giovanna, could be Elena's daughter. You know, she's born Italian. She's born speaking Italian, and she has to go back the other direction, trying to rescue the dialect again as the language of authenticity, as Vittoria would have it, you know.
One thing we haven't talked about yet, what are we to make, Alex, of the bracelet? It becomes such an important feature of this novel and gets passed from hand to arm to arm. What is the significance of this bracelet?
Bracelet is, there's a significance of the bracelet to the characters in the novel, but as a result, through that, it becomes a narrative device, actually, I think, which is that it becomes a trigger for stories to be told about it, and for things to happen as a result of it. So it's,
what does it represent in your mind?
I mean, a lot of things. I think it represents, in my mind, I was actually, if I can read again from the novel, when the bracelet is given.
From who to whom?
Let's see. So Costanza is giving Giovanna the white gold bracelet.
Okay.
On page 121.
Okay.
And so when I try to assign phases to the continuous flow of life that has passed through me up until today, I'm convinced that I permanently became someone else when, one afternoon, Costanza came to visit without her daughters. Overseen by my mother, who for days had had puffy eyes and a reddened face, due, she said, to the cold wind that blew from the sea and caused the window panes and the balcony railings to vibrate. Costanza, her face severe, sallow, gave me her white gold bracelet. Why are you giving it to me? I asked, bewildered. She's not giving it to you, my mother said. She's returning it to you. Costanza's beautiful mouth quavered for a long moment before she managed to say, I thought it was mine, but it was yours. And so it's to me it represents this very complicated legacy that Giovanna is receiving from her family in a way through this. It's the flip side to the resemblance to the aunt, this bracelet. Like the resemblance to the aunt is one side of that legacy, whether she resembles the aunt or not, and the bracelet, I think, possibly the other side to it, but also for her, it's the mark of her passage into adulthood. Not quite a rite of passage exactly, but a brand almost that's like imposed on her.
Lili, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the bracelet, what Alex was saying about it being a narrative function is so important because the bracelet, I think, becomes the ultimate kind of truth conveyor, right? Like it is when Vittoria sees the bracelet on Costanza's wrist that she realizes that all of her suspicions about her brother's perfidy are actually proven correct. And that ends, with the dissolution of their marriage. And then much later, when Juliana has the bracelet and confesses to Giovanna her discomfort at having to wear it, both because Vittoria is always checking, but also because we find out what the origin of the bracelet is, which is that it belonged to Margherita, the woman Vittoria was betraying with Enzo, Margherita's husband. It belonged to Margherita's mother, and Enzo, her lover, Vittoria's lover, stole it from his mother-in-law in order to give it to his lover's mother. And so it is, what Giovanna says about it is that it actually undoes Vittoria's own story about the perfect, incomparable love that she and Enzo had. So that, for so long, I think, has been the narrator's central fascination, right? Vittoria's a single-minded dedication to the memory of Enzo and of her relationship with Enzo and the sort of holy passion that they shared and the impossible love that, she will never actually give up, turns out to have been hollow too, so that the bracelet at every turn just keeps on destroying illusion after illusion in a really interesting narrative way.
It's as though the bracelet becomes the focal point of all the lies that adults tell throughout this book. Laura?
Yeah, no, I thought it was very interesting when Lili was saying that she put posted in the book to signal where a story was told in a different version. I found myself do the same thing when I was tracing the genealogy of the bracelet, right? So as you were saying, Diane, the bracelet is the concrete manifestation of the abstract theme of the novel, lies, right? The theme is lies and the lies that everybody tells. The bracelet is a concrete object that represents that in my mind, because every time you think you know where the bracelet came from, then you're faced with another turn of its story. And that also takes me back to Alex's comment about the fairy tale quality of the novel, right? Because really, again, the cursed object. And finally, one other layer I wanted to mention is that there is a writer, a fabulous writer, Elsa Morante. And it's possible that Elena Ferrante chose her name to echo Elsa Morante. So Elsa Morante. And she wrote a novel titled Menzogna e Sortileggio in Italian, translated as The House of Liars, The House of Liars, where there is a ring, a golden ring with rubies and diamonds, like the bracelet in this novel, that appears and disappears over a dozen times, and there again also signals the hidden relationships among the various characters. So it could also be a tribute of Elsa Ferrante, Elsa Ferrante's tribute to this, great writer. Sorry, Elena Ferrante, Elsa Morante. So Elena Ferrante's tribute to Elsa Morante.
Truly, at the center of this book is the adolescent growing into sexual maturity, trying to find her way toward sexual maturity. And it's so complicated for Giovanna Lili. She does not want to give herself away, and yet she's very tempted along the way. She has relations with somewhat older men, some contemporaries, but they don't really please her. Talk about her efforts to understand her own feelings about sexuality.
I thought that her, yeah, that's hard. I don't know. I think that the novel was often at its most interesting when she was struggling with the intersection of sort of intellectual questions about aesthetics and spirituality, and then and rerouting them, I think, in a way maybe similar to her father, into subterranean sexual questions that she was at pains to figure out how to be honest about. Like there's a moment close to the end of the novel when Juliana is on the train, is almost desperately confessing how nervous she is that she's going to be replaced in Roberto's affections by a woman who is more intellectual or understands what he writes, et cetera, et cetera. And what impresses Giovanna about that is how precise she is about her feelings and how she does not hide from herself the way that Giovanna does. And this is right as Giovanna is about to rationalize traveling back to Milan to betray her own friend, both knowing and pretending not to know that that's what she has in mind. So what I would say is that I think the sexual, the sexual undertones, I think, are most interesting when it comes to figuring out what radical, honest, ethical conduct might be in relation to her urges and desires. But ultimately, I'm going to say I found that part of the novel pretty confusing. Like, I don't actually completely understand her relationship with the two sisters, Ida and Angela. I don't quite understand what the ending meant. It was surprising to me, and maybe Laura, you could speak to this. It was surprising to me that a room full of academics would have taken a 16-year-old girl as seriously as they appeared to. There were just, this was the part of the novel I think I found hardest to track.
Confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Laura?
Yes, well, I think this part about the sexual experiences, I think it gets a bit repetitive, this is unpleasant, degrading sex is I think one of the, I agree, it's one of the weakest points of the novel. The ending, I thought that the ending kind of opens up to a sequence. I think we should get ready for volume number 2. I think because it seems to, it seems to call for a next installment. And I also thought it was a bit unexpected this move from Angela to Ida at the end, right? Except that Ida is the writer, is the one who writes. So in a way, she controls fiction, if you wish. So I wonder if at the end, with this new partnership, we are again getting close to the world of the Neapolitan novels, and which perhaps here I'm pushing it too far, but I was struck at the beginning, the passage that Marisa Tomei read, where she says that she doesn't know what she is, and nothing,
Exactly.
and even what they say, not even. Perhaps I'm only a tangled knot, and nobody, not even the one who at this moment is writing, knows if it contains the right thread of a story. It almost seems to allude to the possibility that the one who's writing the story is not Giovanna, right? So could it be Ida? Could it be that the same split and yet complicity that we witnessed in the Neapolitan novels between the two brilliant friends, who steal ideas from one another, so that's what I was, trying to think about.
And indeed, one of our listeners has written, what is the message of the book? At the end, Giovanna loses her virginity as if it were something she had to throw away. She leaves the bracelet behind and leaves with Ida for Venice, quote, to become adults as no one ever had before. Live without lies or continue the lying lives. Alex, what do you make of that?
Well, I feel like, when we say that her sexual exploration is complicated, I feel like it's complicated by capitalism and by her relationship to this idea of like how she's supposed to live as an adult, the way in which a kind of unspoken and yet also often commented upon value is placed on her appearance within an economy that will only allow her this much selfhood, this much of this much of that, through her apparent beauty, her apparent value to men. And I don't think she wants anything of that. So when she leaves the bracelet behind and goes off to live as no adults ever had, I think it's about looking for a relationship to her sexuality, to her appearance that isn't bounded by those kinds of terms. I think she wants out,
But that, I must say, the description of her sexual encounter at the end was as cold, as devoid of feeling, as devoid of pleasure, as devoid of humanness as anything I've ever read about a young woman beginning her sexual life. It left me feeling so sad for her and yet angry with her that she had thrown away something as precious as her own virginity just for the experience rather than because she had anything invested in it. Lili?
It was very, I found that resonated with me. Like, I think the virginity does become, or certainly at that time, like, does become a kind of burden that is horrifying to have to live with. And I could actually perfectly sympathize with her desire to get it over with quite technically and clinically. And you're right, it's a very bleak scene. I thought, and I'm thinking maybe I'm alone here, I thought that Ida was I thought that this was a romantic happy ending, that she was going off with Ida, that heterosexuality was a disaster, and that this was like the end of a love story in a very fairy tale-ish kind of way. But it was, maybe, did anyone else read it that way?
Laura.
Yeah.
Alex, go ahead.
No, sorry, Laura first. Laura first.
Okay.
I thought it was yeah. I mean, it seems to go in that direction. It comes kind of abruptly, kind of suddenly. She hears Ida read the story. Ida reads the story. The story is basically the story of of Angela and Giovanna's encounters, right? But it's told from Ida's perspective. It's kind of interesting because it kind of mirrors the situation Giovanna was in when she went to Milan. Mm-hmm. And so she was sleeping on the couch while Giuliana was with Roberto. But when she went to visit Angela and Ida, she slept with Angela, and Ida was the one recording everything. So there is some kind of complicity at that level. And all of a sudden, Giovanna kisses Ida, and the day after they live together. I thought it was a bit abrupt. I thought it was a bit sudden. I understand that. I think there is in other parts of this book, I feel a distance between what Elena Ferrante is trying to do and what she actually does. And very often she needs to tell you what she's trying to do. And also this to me was a bit too abrupt. Yes, I understand it could be a happy ending. It comes so suddenly that it strikes me as not completely, believable. About one more thing about the sex in the novel, I was also struck by the fact, I was talking to Rebecca about this, the fact that Giovanna could be, as I mentioned, Elena Greco's daughter. So now she was born in 1979. We are told that very clearly at the beginning of the novel. So the action takes place in the 90s, right? And yet there is no much difference in gender dynamics between the world of the Neapolitan portrait, so where Elena and Lila were born in the mid-40s, right? There is not much difference in gender dynamic between that world and this world. So between the, say, early 60s and the mid-90s there. I thought that was interesting, right? I mean, the same power struggle, the same gender dynamics, yeah.
One of our listeners has written in and said this is the first novel of Elena Ferrante's I have read. Can you tell us about Elena Ferrante? Is that not a pseudonym? Isn't she a very private person who does not make herself very well known? Alex?
It is, I mean, sure, Elena Ferrante is a pen name, yes. A nom de plume in a long tradition of writers choosing such things. And she's written, Frontamalia is a book she's published of her interviews and some of her essays, and in those she goes into the reasons for that choice. So if you're just finding her for the first time, and you're curious about that choice, certainly that book would be a place for many answers. It's kind of funny to see in Frontamalia like the progression of interviewers asking her, trying to figure out who she is, trying to get more and more information out of her, and her sort of frustration with always getting these questions about her identity, these questions about why she doesn't want to answer, which resemble this narrator's frustration with participating in what seems to be the kind of complicated and unethical sexual economy of adults, where she doesn't want people to read her books because you might think she's beautiful. She doesn't want people to read her books because you might think this or that of her appearance. She just wants you to read the books. She doesn't want you to know what she's like.
Some people have actually speculated that Elena Ferrante is not female, that she's a male. Laura?
Yes, and absolutely. There are many hypotheses, but I just want to say that I'm not at all interested in knowing Elena Ferrante's real name or real identity. But the issue does interest me insofar as it challenges our idea of authorship. So, for instance, this book, to me, this book has all the ingredients of a Ferrante book. Is becoming a bit the Ferrante workshop, like Leonardo used to have its own. It's all the great artists had their workshop. I would not be in the least surprised if we found out that her books, starting I would say with the third book in the series, are are a collective production. I mean, this book to me screams, I'm part of the Ferrante brand. Look at me, there is Naples, there is unpleasant sex, there are complex family stories, buy me, I don't know, we'll never know. And as I said, I'm not interested in the issue just because of curiosity, but I would not be surprised if in the end we found out that it's a group of people is involved in these novels. And I think, sorry, just if I may just add, I think that from the third book in the series, in the My Brilliant Friend, I think I kind of noticed a certain unevenness, a certain repetition, a certain tendency to exploit the same themes over and over again, like the dolls, that I wonder what's happening there. And this book reinforces my idea.
What's your thought, Lili?
I have always been thrilled by her insistence on pseudonymity, and I find it very exciting for an author to be freed of all of the accoutrements of having to promote and be subject to all of those forms of judgment that Alex was mentioning that are irrelevant to the text itself. So I wish that there were a lot more Ferrantes, and that were actually just a way that literature could exist. I'm deeply uninterested, I think, in the apparatus of marketing and publicity that books are forced to go through. And I have enjoyed seeing how I think it's been an interesting experiment to see how Ferrante's opting out of that has actually narrowed discussion to the book. Though admittedly there is an entire sort of gossipy, like, secondary sphere that is trying to unmask her, and that's annoying. But I think if her goal, I think, was to force people to just deal with the text and not with her as a personality or a celebrity or somebody who could be picked apart or asked how autobiographical is your work, I think that is, I'm glad that exists, and I wish there were more of it.
In the end, Alex, how did you feel about the book?
I liked the abrupt end. It felt like a joke in a way, like a sort of cosmic joke. And it had a kind of that sort of, that's all I'm going to tell you kind of.
But did you love it? Did you like it? Did you feel so about it? I mean,
I did like it. I did not feel so about it. I understand, what Laura's talking about. I'm thinking of, like, another Italian writer I love a great deal, Natalia Ginsburg, who often writes about apartments and real estate and relatives arguing about real estate and who gets an apartment, who doesn't get the apartment, why are you selling the house, what's wrong with you, there's you could do a lot of the same sorts of, I think you can track a writer's obsessions at a certain point in their career, perhaps. That's a way of saying it. And I thought, the fairy tale quality to it seemed to be something she had been leading up to, right? In this kind of, in the children's book that she had about the doll, some of her earlier novels before, I felt like the theme of the doll is also something that we see a lot in her books. So,
well, this has been a most interesting discussion. Thank you all so much for being with us, Laura Benedetti, Alexander Chee, and Lili Loofbourow. Thank you for your insights and your comments. And now, before you go, please take a minute to fill out the short survey about this event that's going to pop up on your screen. And if you would, please consider donating to WAMU. It's your financial support that makes events like this one possible. You can go to dianerehm.org/give. And just to let you know, we're going to take a 1-month break from the book club in December so that we can all enjoy the holidays with our families. The next meeting will be on Wednesday, January 27th. We'll be reading The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Stay tuned to your email for more details. And once again, thank you all for being with us. It was a great pleasure to have you. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.